At a high-profile zoo reopening, a strict manager blocks a casually dressed woman from entering, assuming she doesn't belong at the exclusive event. Guests watch. Cameras start recording. The tension builds. But when someone realizes the woman is Ronda Rousey, everything shifts. What happens next isn't loud. It's controlled, powerful, and unforgettable. Watch until the end, because the real moment isn't when her identity is revealed. It's what she chooses to do after. The entrance to the zoo was packed with photographers, donors, and local officials. It was reopening night, a private preview before the public launch. Red carpet rolled across the stone walkway. A banner stretched across the gates. Security stood alert. At the center of the entrance stood the zoo manager. Crisp suit, tight posture, tablet in hand. Tonight had to be flawless. That's when a woman in a plain hoodie, joggers, and sneakers walked toward the entrance.
No heels.
No makeup team.
No entouraje.
Just steady steps and quiet focus. The manager raised a hand immediately. "Excuse me, ma'am. This is a private VIP event." She stopped calmly. "I know," she replied.
I'm invited.
He scanned her briefly, head to toe. "Invitation name?" She gave it. He checked his tablet, scrolled, paused. "I don't see you on the list," he said firmly. "This event is for donors and special guests only." A few people in line turned to look. Whispers started. The woman didn't react. "I was told my name would be added this morning," she said evenly. The manager shook his head. "If it's not here, I can't let you in." The tone wasn't aggressive, but it was final. A couple of guests near the entrance lifted their phones slightly. Moments like this always drew attention. The woman adjusted her hoodie sleeves casually. "Is there someone from the foundation I can speak to?" she asked. The manager exhaled impatiently. "Ma'am, we can't delay entry for everyone who claims they're invited." The word claims hung in the air, and then someone near the rope barrier froze. "Wait, that's Ronda Rousey." The whisper spread faster this time. Another guest leaned closer. "No way." The woman slowly pulled her hood back fully. There was no dramatic reveal, just clarity. It was Ronda Rousey. The manager's posture stiffened instantly. He blinked. "Ms. Rousey," he said, voice shifting. She nodded once. The crowd energy flipped in seconds. Phones were no longer subtle. People began murmuring loudly now. "That's her. Why didn't he recognize her?" The manager stepped aside quickly. "My apologies," he said. "Of course, please come in. There must have been a system error." Ronda looked at him steadily.
No anger.
"No es mirk. Just stillness." "I understand doing your job," she said calmly. Relief flickered across his face. But she wasn't done. "Just make sure you're doing it fairly." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. Because moments ago, she had been just another face in casual clothes. Now she was someone recognizable. And the difference in treatment was obvious. The manager nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely." Ronda glanced at the line behind her. A family stood a few steps back. A mother and two young girls holding small animal plush toys, dressed modestly, looking unsure. "Are they invited?" Ronda asked quietly. The manager checked. "They're scholarship guests," he said.
Ronda Navid.
"Let them walk in with me." The atmosphere softened. The little girls' faces lit up in disbelief. The manager stepped aside fully this time. "Of course." As Ronda walked through the gates with the family beside her, applause started unexpectedly from a few donors near the entrance. It wasn't loud, but it was meaningful. Inside the event space, cameras turned toward her immediately. Organizers rushed forward with smiles and apologies. But Ronda didn't address the misunderstanding publicly. She didn't call it out on stage. She didn't demand acknowledgement. Instead, she spent the first 15 minutes talking with the scholarship kids, asking them about their favorite animals. The manager remained near the entrance, replaying the interaction in his mind. The assumption had been instant, automatic, unquestioned. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't intentionally cruel. It was subtle, the kind that slips in quietly and feels logical in the moment. casual clothes.
No visible entouraje.
No high-profile entrance. Therefore, not important. But importance doesn't always announce itself. And that realization was settling heavily on the manager's shoulders as the event continued inside. He stood near the gate longer than necessary, watching guests flow through with polished suits and rehearsed smiles. His tablet still glowed in his hand, but he wasn't reading it anymore. He was replaying the earlier exchange frame by frame. The tone he used, the word claims, the way he had stepped slightly forward to block her path without hesitation. It hadn't felt aggressive at the time. It had felt procedural. But now it felt revealing. Inside the zoo courtyard, the atmosphere had transformed into something elegant and curated. String lights were wrapped around trees. Exotic animals could be heard in the distance. Servers floated through the crowd carrying silver trays. And in the center of the space stood Ronda Rousey. Not commanding attention, not posing for cameras, just speaking quietly with the scholarship family she had walked in with. The two young girls listened to her like she was telling them a secret about the world. She knelt slightly to meet their eye level, pointing toward the giraffe enclosure as one of the animals moved gracefully in the background. The donors nearby watched carefully. Some recognized her immediately. Others noticed her presence before they recognized her identity. There was something about the way she stood, grounded, balanced, aware. One of the board members hurried over. "Rhonda, we're so honored you could make it," he said, slightly out of breath. "We had you scheduled for a brief introduction speech later." She smiled politely. "I'm happy to support," she replied, "but I'd rather keep it simple." The board member nodded quickly. Of course. He lowered his voice. "We're terribly sorry about the mix-up at the entrance." Rhonda glanced briefly toward the gates. "It's handled," she said calmly. But it wasn't forgotten. Not by the manager. He finally stepped away from the entrance and entered the courtyard himself, scanning the crowd until he found her. For a moment he hesitated. Approaching now felt different. Earlier he had authority. Now he had perspective. He walked toward her slowly, rehearsing words in his head that suddenly felt inadequate. When he reached her, he cleared his throat gently. "Ms. Rousey," he began, voice more measured than before. "I wanted to apologize properly." She stood upright, facing him fully. "For what?" she asked, not defensively, genuinely. "For making assumptions," he admitted. The honesty surprised even him. She held his gaze steadily. "We all make them," she said. He shook his head slightly. "But I enforce standards here, and I didn't apply them evenly." The admission hung in the air. Around them, the event buzzed softly, but the conversation felt isolated, intentional. Rhonda crossed her arms lightly, not in defiance, but in thought. "Standards are important," she said, "but awareness is stronger." He nodded. "I see that now." She studied him for a moment longer. "What made you change?" she asked. The question wasn't accusatory. It was curious. He hesitated before answering. "The way you handled it," he said honestly. "You didn't react. You didn't try to intimidate. You didn't announce who you were." A faint smile touched her expression. "I didn't need to, and that was the difference. Power that knows itself doesn't rush to declare itself." The manager exhaled slowly. "When someone important walks in, we treat them differently," he admitted. Tonight exposed that. Rhonda glanced around at the donors, the cameras, the elegance. "Everyone's important to someone," she said quietly. That sentence lingered longer than anything else, because it reframed the entire moment. It wasn't about celebrity recognition. It was about baseline respect. Across the courtyard, one of the young girls waved at Rhonda excitedly, holding up a small zoo brochure. Rhonda waved back, smiling. The manager noticed the interaction. "You could have made that a scene," he said. "You could have embarrassed me." She shrugged slightly. "That wouldn't fix anything." He absorbed that. Correction without humiliation. Strength without dominance. As the evening progressed, the story of the entrance incident began spreading quietly among guests. Not in a scandalous way, but in a reflective one. People discussed it in low tones near the food tables. Did you hear what happened at the gate? She handled it with so much composure. That manager looked shaken. The narrative wasn't about her being denied entry anymore. It was about how she responded. And the manager felt that shift deeply. Later in the evening, when Ronda was briefly invited to say a few words to the donors, she stepped onto the small stage without fanfare. She didn't mention the entrance. She didn't reference the misunderstanding. Instead, she spoke about wildlife conservation, about protecting environments that can't speak for themselves, about strength being used responsibly. But in one subtle line, she said something that resonated through the entire courtyard. Real strength, she said, voice steady through the microphone, is how you treat people when you think no one's watching. The manager felt that line land directly, because earlier cameras hadn't been obvious. But the moment had still mattered. Applause followed her speech, not explosive, but sincere. When she stepped down from the stage, she didn't gravitate toward the highest donors. She returned to the scholarship family. The manager stood at a distance, observing differently now, not as an enforcer, but as a learner. By the end of the night, when the last guests began leaving through the gates, he greeted each one with the same tone, whether they wore designer suits or simple jackets. He didn't realize he was doing it at first. It just felt necessary. As Ronda exited later that evening, she paused briefly near him. "Good event," she said simply. "Thank you," he replied. She studied him one last time. "Keep the standards," she added. "Just widen the lens." And with that, she walked toward her car.
No entourage. No dramatic exit.
Just steady steps into the night. The gates eventually closed. The lights dimmed. But for the manager, the lesson remained illuminated. The assumption had been quick. The correction had been quiet. And the impact, it would shape how he stood at that gate from that night forward. Long after the applause faded and the cameras turned away.